Boker Tov, we're on Memvav.
And wow.
And Memvav. Very first word of Memvav Amud Aleph. Rabbi Zerah Chalash, Rabbi Zerah became sick. Al legabe Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu came to see him and visit him. Kabel alei im mitpach ketina harich shakeh. Avidna yomat aval Rabbanan. He said to himself, in other words, Rabbi Abahu, when he came to visit, he said, if Rabbi Zerah, that they used to call the small one with the burnt legs, which I guess it was his nickname, okay, as it explains in Masekhet Bava Metzia what the basis for this nickname was. He said, if he gets better, I will make a party for all the rabbis to celebrate. And if he got better. So Avad Seudat L'Chulu Rabbanan, they made a party for all the rabbis. Ki Matal Mishrei, when it came to do Hamotzi, Amar Le Rabbi Zerah Lishrilan Mar. So Rabbi Zerah said to to Rabbi Abahu, please, cut the chalab, make the hamotzi. So he said, Amar le lo savar lamar lahad Rabbi Yochanan de Amar balabait potzeah. Didn't you hear the halacha that Rabbi Yochanan said that whoever is the master of the house, the owner of the home, and since we're in Rabbi Zerah's home, he's the one who's supposed to make the hamotzi. We're making a party in his house, he's supposed to make the hamotzi. Sharalahu, so he went ahead, he did the hamotzi. When it came to Birkat HaMazon, Amar le nivrich lanmar. So then he said to Rabbi Abahu, please say Birkat HaMazon. Amar le lo savar lamar lahad Rav Huna de min Bavel de Amar botzea mivarech. Don't you agree with what Rav Huna from Babylonia said? Botzea mivarech, that the same person who says the hamotzi has to also say Birkat HaMazon. So basically, Rabbi Abahu was trying to put everything in Rabbi Zerah. Oh, it's your home, so you should do the hamotzi. It's your home, so you should do Birkat HaMazon. And he calls Rav Huna from Bavel, because they were in Israel when they're having this conversation. Okay, even though it's the same Rav Huna that we normally see. Ve'iu keman sevirale ki hadama Rabbi Yochanan. Why was it that Rabbi Zerah offered Rabbi Abahu, the guest, the opportunity to say Birkat HaMazon? Because he was following a different teaching stated by Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Balabayit Botzea, Ve'oreach Mivarech, that the Balabayit, the owner of the home, is the one who should do the Hamotzi. But the visitor, the guest, should do Birkat HaMazon. What's the reason? Balabayit Botzea Kedeshi Yivtza Ba'ayin Yafeh. Because if a person who's a guest is distributing the bread, he's not going to feel comfortable, giving people a lot, because it's not his bread. He's a guest. But when the owner of the home, when the balabayit is the one who's giving out the challah, or giving out the bread, giving out the food, he can give large portions. Okay, so that's what he says. Ba'in yafei, can give out with a good eye, generously. Va'oreach mivarech. What's the reason why the visitor, the guest, should say Birkat HaMazon? Kedesh yivarech balabayit, so he can bless the balabayit. He can bless the host. Mai mivarech. What does he say? Yiratzon shalei vosh balabayit ba'olam hazeh v'lo yikalem lo'olam haba. He says, may it be God's will that the balabayit, the host, not be embarrassed in this world or in the next world. V'Rebbi mosif ba'advarim. Rabbi would add additional parts to the blessing. V'yitzlach me'od b'chol nechasav. He should succeed in all of his business. V'yu nechasav unchaseinu mutzachim ukrovim la'ir. His business should be successful and it should be close to the city, which meant that it was easily, he didn't have a long commute to work, basically. It says, V'al yishlot satan lo b'maaseh yadav lo b'maaseh yadenu. And the Satan should not interfere, not with our actions and not with his actions. In other words, and also, we say a version of this, definitely a variation of this for the visitor saying the blessing for the balabait also. It's very similar to this, but we say that there shouldn't be any interference from any negative forces impinging on our actions or his actions.
There's a mistake here. Ve'al yizdaker. It's yizdak.
Right, it should be ve'al yizdak. Lefanav velo lefanenu, but here it says yizdaker. So what does he explain? He says on the side that there's another version. You're right. He says in the Masorot Hashas that it should say yizdakek. Lo lefanav lo lefanenu shel hirhur chet va'avera va'avon me'ata v'ad olam. That there shouldn't occur, not before him and not before us, any matter of a thought of sin or transgression or avon, any of these various types of sins, accidental sin, intentional, rebellious, from now and forevermore. So we pray not only for the material welfare of the Balabait, of our host, but also for the spiritual welfare of the Balabait. And that's really all built on that shorter version that came before. The shorter version that came before said he shouldn't be embarrassed in this world, and he shouldn't be embarrassed in the next world. And Rabbi added an expansion on those themes. What does it mean not to be embarrassed in this world? It means to be successful in what you do and to be able to achieve your goals. And what does it mean not to be embarrassed in the next world? It means not to be caught up in any averot, any sins that you're going to be ashamed of in the next world. So it's an expansion on those two themes. So ad hechan birkat hazimun. What is considered birkat hazimun? Now this perek is dealing primarily or essentially with birkat hamazon, the seventh perek of Berachot. And although we didn't do yesterday's daf because it was Shabbat, it introduces the concept of zimun, that when three people eat bread together, they have a zimun, and what the parameters of that are. And so he asks, what is birkat hazimun? Now, we're going to see that there are some different interpretations of what the significance of what this is, but we'll see. Rav Nachman amar ad nivarech. Rav Nachman says it means until nivarech. In other words, if you are at the table with everybody, and you have Birkat Hamazon. So we say Havlan v'Nivrech Malkayla Kadisha. The Ashkenazim say Rabotai Nivarech, whatever. Then you say everybody says Nivarech Shechal Mishalo or Nivarech Elokeinu Shechal Mishalo. Everybody says that, and then everyone answers Baruch Shechal Mishalo V'Tochainu or Baruch Elokeinu Shechal Mishalo V'Tochainu. So according to Rav Nachman, that is called Zimun. That's all the Zimun is. Why is that significant? Because that means that anything other than that, the Yachid has to say. Even if you're by yourself, you have to say it. Okay? That's what Rashi says. Rav Sheshet amar ad hazan. Rav Sheshet says until hazan et hakol, that's all considered zimun. So according to Rashi, it would seem that if you're alone, if you're a yachid, you don't have to say hazan et hakol. You don't have to say the first beracha according to Rav Sheshet of Birkat Hamazon. And so Tosafot goes crazy on this, and all the other Rishonim say, what are you talking about? The first beracha of Birkat Hamazon, it's deoraita. How can you say that the individual doesn't have to say it, and so on? And so there's a lot of discussion what Rashi really means. Does he really mean literally that the yachid individual isn't going to say it? So there's a lot of discussion. So Tosafot actually has a different interpretation. They say that it doesn't mean that the yachid, that an individual doesn't have to say the first beracha of Birkat Hamazon. What it means is that if you have three people, and let's say two of them want to say Birkat Hamazon, and a third guy, he doesn't want to say Birkat Hamazon, he's still on his seventh bagel, he doesn't want to stop. Okay, so they can say to him, do the zimun with us, and then you keep eating.
Well, what we learned yesterday is that he has the obligation of doing it.
Right, he has to do it. Right. So the two can pull the one. So the two say, you have to eat with us. You have to do Birkat Hamazon with us. So he does Birkat Hamazon. So the question according to Tosafot is, how long does he have to listen before he can go back to his seventh bagel? Okay? So according to Rav Nachman, he just has to say Baruch She'achalnu Mishalo, and then he goes back to eating again. According to Rav Sheshet, no, he has to listen all the way to Hazan et Hakol, and then he can go back to eating. And it's important because, in those days, the way that they did Birkat Hamazon was one person did it for everybody. There wasn't like what we do where one person may or may not say it out loud. Like here at Magen David, we always say it aloud for those who don't have it in front of them, and it's better for them. But in those days, one person said it for everybody, and nobody even bothered having, trying to follow along. They just listened. So he would have to listen up to Hazan et Hakol, and then he could go back to eating. That's what Rav Sheshet says. So Ne'ema Katanai, maybe we can find a basis for this machloket, for this argument in an earlier source. Because one statement, one Baraita said Birkat Hamazon is 2 and 3. One says it's 3 and 4. What does this mean? 2, 3, 3, 4? What were they talking about? Okay. Let's work with the premise that the fourth blessing of Birkat Hamazon is derabanan. So we're putting that on the side for a second. The blessing that starts La'ada Elavinu Malkeinu Adirenu Boraenu Goalenu, that's rabbinical. It's called the blessing of Hatov V'Hametiv. It was added later. The first three berachot up to Bonei Yerushalayim, that was the biblical Birkat Hamazon. So my love, maybe this is what they're arguing about when one says Birkat Hamazon is 2 and 3, and one says it's 3 and 4. That man damar shtayim v'shalosh kasavarad hazan, or man damar shalosh v'arba kasavarad nivarech. That the one that says it's 2 and 3 says that in a zimun you have 3 things. You're going to have 3 berachot because you're going to have hazan. Right, you're going to have the Hazan et Ha'olam. You're going to have that first blessing. We're going with Rashi's interpretation, right? So you're going to have that first blessing of Hazan, and the other 2, Nod Lecha and Rachem. But when it's a Yachid, according to Rashi, what is it going to be? Only Shnayim, only 2. Meaning you're only going to say Nod Lecha and Rachem. And what does it mean in the Braita where it says Birkat HaMazon is 3 and 4? Because according to that person, the zimun is counted as a beracha. So when you're alone, you're going to say only 3 berachot. And when you have a zimun, there's an extra beracha, which is the blessing of the zimun. Okay? So this is following Rashi's interpretation. So, not true. Rav Nachman b'Teretz L'Tamei, Rav Sheshet b'Teretz L'Tamei, they can both work this out to their own advantage. How so? Rav Nachman b'Teretz L'Tamei, Dekulei Alma, Ad Nevarech. Rav Nachman will say, no, everybody agrees with me that zimun is the only thing that's added when there are 3 people is the zimun. The first blessing of Birkat HaMazon is always said, even by an individual. Man damar shalosh ve'arba shapir. So according to the one that says 3 and 4, that makes sense with what I'm saying. Because when there's a zimun, there's 4 blessings, because the zimun is extra. And when you're by yourself, you say just the 3 brachot, because we're not counting that last bracha, we're just counting the first 3. And uman damar shtayim v'shalosh. So what does the Braita mean when it says you only have 2 and 3? That amar lachacha bebirkat poalim askinan. The amar mar potech beazan v'koleh b'nei Yerushalayim bebirkat haaretz. That's talking about poalim, workers, laborers who worked for a salary. So the halacha was that they had to shorten their birkat hamazon because they couldn't take any extra minutes away from working for their employer. So what did they do? They would combine the second and third berachot of birkat hamazon into one. So what does Rav Nachman say? When you're in a normal situation. So what does it mean? Birkat HaMazon is 3 and 4. When there's a zimun, it's 4. Because you have zimun plus the 3 berachot. When you're by yourself, it's only 3. And when you're a po'el, when you're a worker, so what's the rule there? If you have a zimun, it's going to be 3, because you have zimun, and then 2 berachot. If you're by yourself as a worker, you only have 2 berachot, because you combine the second and the third. So, Damar Mar. Right, so we said that already. Rav Sheshet b'Teretz L'Tamei. So Rav Sheshet will also answer this his own way. Dekulei Almad Hazan. Actually, everybody agrees that a zimun goes until Hazan et Hakol. And when you don't have a zimun, you only say No de lecha and rachem, like I said. That's what Rav Sheshet says. Man da'amar shtayim v'shalosh shapir. So the Braita that says 2 and 3 makes sense. When there's a zimun, there are 3 brachot. When there's no zimun, only 2 brachot, because you don't say hazan et Hakol. However, uman da'amar shalosh ve'arba. But the one who says 3 and 4, kasavara tova metiv deoraitahi. That Braita that said that there's 3 and 4, it's not because he thinks that when you're alone you say the blessing of hazan et ha'olam kulo. It's not. It's not because you say hazan et Hakol. It's because he thinks that hatov v'hametiv is a biblical blessing as well. So he holds that, when you don't have a zimun, you start no de lecha rachem and hatov v'hametiv. And when you have a zimun, then you have hazan et Hakol, and you have no de lecha rachem and hatov v'hametiv. So therefore, according to Rav Sheshet, you can work out both, fitting with the idea that when there's no zimun, you omit the first bracha. And when there is a zimun, you have the first bracha. So, Amar Rav Yosef says, I'll prove to you, though, that last blessing, hatov v'hametiv, is not biblical. How so? Because you look, the workers don't even bother saying it. We said that the workers have to combine the second and third beracha, but they don't even have to say the fourth one. Obviously, it's not biblical. How could the rabbis tell a worker, don't do a mitzvah from the Torah?
But why?
It's impossible.
Because of the zman?
Because they don't want to waste even 1 minute from the employer. Because every minute you're on the clock, you're being paid.
But it's not biblical anyway.
Which one?
Well, that's what they're discussing.
Right, that's what they're saying. That's what Rav Yosef is saying. It's not biblical. That's why the last beracha of hatov v'hametiv, we don't have to say it.
There's a machloket.
Right, there's a machloket. But he's saying my proof that it's not biblical is because they don't say it. Right, they don't say it. So Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta mishmei de Rav. Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta said in the name of Rav, Teidad hatov v'hametiv lav deoraita. I'll give you another reason why we know it's not deoraita. Sharei potech ba bebaruch ve'en chotem ba bebaruch. Because you open with Baruch Atah Hashem and you don't close with Baruch. So you see that because you're starting with Baruch, that means it's in addition to Birkat HaMazon. Because No de lecha doesn't start with Baruch. Rachem doesn't start with Baruch. Why doesn't it start with Baruch? Because it's attached. It's called Beracha Hasimucha Lachaverta. Any blessing which is attached to when you have a series of Berachot, like Ahavat Olam. When you start Baruch Atah Hashem, Yotzer Or Vorei Choshech, etc., and then Ahavat Olam, you don't say Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Ahavat Olam. Right? Why? Because it's Simucha. It's connected to the previous one. So you see that it's not connected to the previous ones because it starts Baruch Atah Hashem. So it's a new entity. It was added on to Birkat HaMazon, as we see. That every blessing should start with Baruch and end with Baruch, except for blessings on foods, like Borei Priya Etz doesn't end with Baruch Atah Hashem something. Uberkata mitzvot, blessings on mitzvot, ubracha semucha lechaverta, and blessings that are attached to a blessing that came before. They don't begin with Baruch.
So how do they consider it a zimun
bracha? Well, it's not really a bracha in the same sense, right? It's not really a bracha in the same sense as this. You're right. Yeah. Ubracha achrona sheb'kriyat Shema, and the last bracha in Kriyat Shema. Okay. Yesh ben shepotech ben bebaruch, ve'en chotem bebaruch. There are some that open with the word Baruch and don't close with Baruch. V'yesh ben shechotem ben bebaruch, ve'en potech bebaruch. And there are some that conclude with Baruch, but they don't begin with Baruch. Like Ahavat Olam is a good example of that. It doesn't start with Baruch, but it ends with it. What you see is from the fact that it opens with Baruch, is that it's not considered attached to the previous Berachot. Because then it would omit Baruch and it would have a Baruch at the end instead, like Ahavat Olam. Instead, it opens with Baruch and doesn't end with Baruch, which means it's an independent Beracha. It's not connected to what came before. So V'amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, Teda de'atov ha'metiv lav deoraita. I have another proof that atov ha'metiv is not deoraita. What's the proof? Sharei okrin ota bebet ha'avel. Because in the house of the Avel, when you go to an Avel's house, you change the fourth beracha. You don't say the normal fourth beracha. Kidetani, as we said in the Braita. Ma'im omrim bebet ha'avel. What do you say in the house of the Avel? Baruch atov ha'metiv. You say Baruch atov ha'metiv. Rabbi Akiva says, Baruch dayan emet hatov ha'metiv, hatov ha'metiv in dayan emet lo, ela ema af hatov ha'metiv. In other words, what they're saying is that you change the blessing of the fourth beracha. It's not that you erase hatov ha'metiv. It's that you take that last blessing of hatov ha'metiv and you alter it to include dayan ha'emet, and that way you see that it's its own entity because they're able to change it. In fact, according to Rabbi Akiva, apparently you don't say hatov ha'metiv at all. You say dayan ha'emet. That's what Rashi says. That it's saying, look, Rabbi Akiva told you don't even have to. You just say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech dayan ha'emet. That's it. And according to the Tanakh Kama, you have to actually incorporate. You have to change. If you look at the Siddur, there's a different text for the fourth beracha of Birkat Hamazon when it's said in the house of a mourner. But according to Rabbi Akiva, you just do away with it completely. You just say Dayan Ha'emet. So what do you see from that? That obviously it's not Deoraita, because how could you do that? Alright, so we have lots of proofs here. So Ela Ema Afatov Ha'metiv. Okay, so according to the rabbis in the beginning, it's not that they're saying you don't incorporate Dayan Ha'emet, it's just that they're saying that you have to combine the two. You combine the fourth beracha. Rabbi Akiva says you get rid of hatov ha'metiv altogether, because how can you have a blessing? In other words, Rabbi Akiva is saying, how can you have a blessing hatov ha'metiv lakol and everything in a mourner? The mourner is there. It's hatov ha'metiv lakol, and I'm mourning here. How could you say that? Right? So Rabbi Akiva says you have to just put dayan ha'emet instead.
So what you're saying is that if that was a beracha deoraita,
you wouldn't be able to take it out.
You wouldn't be able to take it out even in the house of the mourner.
Right,
and you would have to say that in the house of the mourner.
You would say it applies to other people. It doesn't apply. I don't feel it right now, but somehow it's still. I would have to do it. Yeah. So Mar Zutra ikla lebe Rav Ashi. One time, Mar Zutra came to the house of Rav Ashi. It's Rabbi Milta, and he came there, and it was a house of mourning. Somebody had passed away. So Patachu Varich Hatov Ha'metiv. This is the blessing that he said. Hatov Ha'metiv El Emet, true God, Dayan Emet, true judge, Shofet B'tzedek, judges in truth, Lokech B'mishpat, who takes according to justice, meaning he takes somebody will take somebody from the world sometimes. V'shalit Ba'olamo, and he's the ruler of his world. Lasot Bo Kirtzono, to do with it according to his will, Kichol Derachav Mishpat, because all of his ways are justice, Sha'akol Shelo V'anachnu Amo, because everything is his, we are his people, V'avadav, and his servants, Uvchol Anachnu Chayvim La'odot Lo, U'levarako, and for everything we are obligated to thank him and to bless him. Goder Piratzot B'Yisrael, Hu Yigdor Et HaPirtzah Hazot B'Yisrael, the one who fixes the breaches in Israel should fix this breach as well, L'chaim, for life. And so that shows you that what did they do? They incorporated the idea of Hatov v'Hametiv, that God is good, but they also acknowledged the mourner. So, in other words, both Rabbi Akiva and the Tanna Kama had the same problem. How can you have a blessing, praising God, you're so good all the time, and thank you, it's always good, in the house of a mourner? So one solution is take that blessing and somehow infuse it with an awareness that God is also the judge, and even though we can't see the goodness always, we have to trust in His ultimate goodness and the goodness of justice, and that somehow there's a meaning to this, and we ask Hashem to fix this pirza, to fix the breakdown that's happened here in this home. So we ask for Hashem's goodness, and so we combine basically a blessing acknowledging God's goodness with a blessing acknowledging the plight of the mourners and the suffering of the mourners. So it's a combination of the two. Lehechanu chozer. So according to Rashi, what he says here is that somebody who comes in and it has to interrupt his. In other words, you have the two people who want to do Birkat Hamazon, and you interrupted this guy, right? We go back to that case. So that guy says, okay, I'll wait to eat my next bagel while you are doing Birkat Hamazon, and then as soon as you get to wherever you need to get, according to Rav Sheshet, it's to Hazan et Hakol, according to Rav Nachman, it's only Zimun. Where does he go back to start over again?
I mean, he's trying to solve a real problem, because
right.
if he just started to eat and then and he has to wait for the entire thing and he's in a hurry, that
right.
presents a problem.
Right. So according to Rashi, this question only makes sense according to Rav Sheshet, because according to Rav Sheshet is the one that said that he had to listen to the whole first beracha. So the other question is, does he have to say that first beracha again? In other words, he went back to eating. So did that first beracha actually count for him? What does he do now? So Rav Zavid Mishmei da Bayamar Chozer LaRosh. According to Rav Zavid in the name of Abai, he said he has to go to the beginning again. For Rabbanan Amrei Lamakom Shepasak V'Lchatal Lamakom Shepasak. The halacha is he goes back to the place where he left off, which is No Delecha. And according to Rashi, according to Rav Sheshet, that's where he would start, just like a regular yachid. Because according to Rashi, since he was a normal yachid, would start from No Delecha anyway, because he doesn't say Hazan et Hakol. So why does he have to go? So the question was, though, since he participated in a zimun, maybe now he has the obligation to go back to Hazan et Hakol and to do the whole thing, because he participated in a zimun and everybody else did Hazan et Hakol. So the answer is no, he doesn't have to. It's just like any other yachid, any other individual who does Birkat Hamazon and only has to say starting from No Delecha. That's where the halacha falls. However, the halacha in Shulchan Aruch is not like this at all, because we say that you only have to listen to the zimun, you don't have to listen to Hazan et Hakol, and you have to start from the beginning when you're done eating.
Also, halacha is that you don't have to wait for them.
You just have to listen until they finish Baruch Shechal Mishalov Tuachim.
And then you can continue eating.
And then you can continue eating.
While they're.
That's all you have to do in order to fulfill your obligation, and then you can go on from there. So that's the way Rashi interprets it here. Amali Reish Galuta Rav Sheshet. The Reish Galuta said to Rav Sheshet, Afal Gav the Rabbanan Kashishai Atun, even though you guys are elder rabbis and you're very wise, Parsa'e B'tzorchei Su'uda B'kiyei Minaychu. The Persians are better than you when it comes to proper etiquette in meals. How so? Bazman she'en shtei mitzot gadol mesev barosh v'sheni lo lemala himenu. Because when they would lie on these couches, so they would lie on a couch to eat, so they would have one person there, they would have the greater person at the head, and the person next to him would be towards his head. In other words, if you think of the two beds, so where is the next bed going to be? It could either be on the side of your head or on the side of your feet, if it's going to be next to you, right? They would put the person who was the sheni, the second in command, towards the head. And uvizman she'em shalosh, gadol mesev be'emtza, sheni lo lemala himenu, shlish lo lemata himenu. And when there are three, the greater one is in the middle. The second in command puts his bed to the head of the first, and the third is to the feet of the first. So he's in the middle. So Amar Lei said to him, so he said, wait a second. I disagree, because if you do it this way, if you set it up that way, then when you need to talk to the guy, how are you going to talk to him? You're going to have to sit up to be able to talk to him. Because think about it, you want to talk to your second in command, your head is here, his feet are where your head is. So how are you going to be able to talk to him? You're going to have to sit up and talk to him. You're not going to be able to recline like comfortably, like the way you want to. So how could we allow this? So Amar Le said to him, he said that that they had a special way of signing with their hands that they didn't have to get up. So that way, that was why they said like that.
That's what the Sephardim
Right.
got to do.
Yeah, yeah. So therefore they didn't have this problem of having to discuss things. But what are the rabbis concerned about? Talking about divrei Torah. So you don't want, if the person's to your head, that means they're like behind you. So how are you going to be able to really talk to them unless you sit up and you face them? If they're to your feet, you can curl around on your couch and you can see them. And then it's easier to be able to have a discussion of divrei Torah. But the Persians are not talking about divrei Torah. They're just making hand signals about how much they like the food or something, or I don't know what. So that's why they had a different habit. So mayim rishonim hechan matchilin. Where do you start mayim rishonim? If you're going to wash your hands before the meal, who should go first? Amar le min hagadol. He said the greatest person should wash their hands netilat yadayim first. So he said, wait a second. Yeshev gadol v'yishmor yadav shnodin kulan. You're going to have the greatest person sit there quietly waiting for the hamotzi while everybody else is getting washed. Amar leila alter maitud takam kame. He said that right away they would bring his table. In other words, in those days they had little tables for everybody. So yes, the greatest person would wash first, but then he would also do hamotzi right away. He didn't wait for everybody. They would bring him his table right away, and so he would wash and he would start eating right away before everybody else. So where do we start with mayim achronim after the meal? Amar Le said to him, minakatan, from the smallest. In other words, start from the youngest person, the least important person. So you're going to leave the poor, the great person with dirty hands the whole time? He has to wash last? How could that be? They didn't remove his table until everybody else had washed their hands. So yeah, he washed last, but they let him keep eating while everyone else was washing. They didn't remove all the tables and then start washing from the least person to the greatest person. But they kept him with his food until such time as it was his turn to do Netilat Yadayim, which was the last person, the Mayim Achronim, who was the last person. So Amar Rav Shish said, Ana mat nita yadana. We don't need any of these Persian customs about washing before and after. Okay, we have what it says in a Tosefta, the Tanya, as it says, Ketan Seder Hasiba. What was the order of reclining? It was when they had two beds. Gadol Mesev Barosh V'Sheni Lo Lemata Himenu. When he would lay on his couch, so the second in command would be to his feet. That way he didn't have to look above him, to sit up to be able to talk to him. He could speak to him. When there were three, however, we agree that when there were three people, they would put the second in command to his head and the third in command to his feet. Mayim Rishonim, we also agree, the greatest person starts. Mayim Achronim, b'zman shehem hey, מתחילים מן הגדול, ובזמן שהם 100, מתחילים מן הקטן, עד שמגיעים אצל ה' וחוזרים ומתחילים מן הגדול. ולמקום שמים אחרונים חוזרים, לשם ברכה חוזרת. And basically, what he says is like this, that when it comes to mayim achronim, it would be this. If there are 5 people, we start from the least person, and we end with the gadol, with the greatest. If there are lots of people, like it says 100 people, if there are a lot of people, so there we have everybody wash, and then when we come to the I'm sorry, I said wrong. We start with the greatest person. If there are only 5 people, we start with the greatest person for mayim achronim. If there are more than 5 people, there are a lot of people, then we start with everybody else, and then the 5 greatest people we leave for last, and of those 5 people, we start from the greatest one. Okay? Right, because otherwise they're going to be waiting the whole time. And whoever receives mayim achronim first is the one who does the birkat hamazon. So that's what it says. Makom shemayim achronim chozrim lisham beracha chozeret. That's where the blessing comes, where the mayim achronim comes. Misayale leRav. This supports the position of Rav. The Amar Rav Chia Bar Ashi Amar Rav, because Rav Chia Bar Ashi said that Rav said, Kol anotel yadav b'acharona, anybody who does the last washing first, meaning mayim achronim first, hu mizuman livracha, he is the one who is invited to do the bracha. And now we repeat a story that we saw earlier in the Masechet, that once it happened that Rav and Rabbi Chia havu yatvei b'sudata kamei de Rabbi. Once Rav and Rabbi Chia were sitting at a meal in front of Rabbi, Amarle he said to him, Rabbi said to Rav, Amarle Rabbi LeRav, Kum mashayadach, get up and wash your hands. And he saw that he was trembling, meaning he thought, why did he tell him to wash his hands? Oh, because he's a filthy, eater, and he has to have, his hands are dirty, or because he's eating too much, or something like that. Amarle bar pachte, he said to him, son of great ones, meaning honorable person, ayin bebirkat mizona ka'amarlach. What he's telling you is, prepare to say the birkat hamazon. That's why he's telling you to wash your hands first. Not because he's trying to insult you. And that's where we're going to conclude for today. Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll continue tomorrow with the last line of Memvav Amud Bet. Or actually, I guess on Rosh Hashanah, we'll all continue on our own. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll start on Tzom Gedalia, continuing the Shiur here in Magen David. Have a great day. Tizkul Shanim Rabot.